Thank you everybody for logging back in. And again, my name is Patricia Becerra, and so we are going to be recording this for those of you who want to rewatch it, and for those of you who signed up and weren't able to be here with us tonight. We will be loading it up to our YouTube channel and sending out a message once it is all there. So again, my name is Patricia Becerra, and I am the Crisis Care Coordinator at the University Counseling Center. So I see our students who may walk in crisis and may need to be seen that same day. And I also provide referrals to the community to providers. So I vet providers in the community to make sure that they're a good fit to be added to our provider list. So I'm going to go ahead and let my co-host introduce himself now.
Yeah, just reintroducing myself again. I'm the outreach coordinator, and you may see me around campus doing various events. I handle most of our campus-facing events, although I also do some therapy, as does Patricia. So, like I said, feel free to message me in the chat here if you have any troubles or any questions that you want to DM me. That's fine. I'll do my best to answer them or bring them to Patricia's attention as she's presenting for us today.
Thank you, Nathaniel. And so we're so excited to cover this content with you all. Again, Building Resiliency, the student workshop to prepare for the fall in 2022. And we're going to be starting classes in a couple weeks. So excited for you to get this information and be able to process it before you're officially back on campus. So again, our goal is to help you learn how to navigate challenges without fear, increase flexibility in how you think, and harness the resiliency that lies within you. Our goal again is not just to bounce back, but to bounce beyond. So we'll be together until about 7 p.m. And again, if there's any questions, you can always email us or give us a call, and we'll share our contact information at the end. Oops. So again, just settings for the meeting. If you can, please stay muted, and then you can select speaker view so that I'm there and the slides, you can still see them. And if you have any questions, again, you can direct it to the host or co-host, and then we will be emailing you all a resource list of what is covered as well. So our goals for today's session is that we want to first reflect on how we have been affected these past 2 years, so kind of recognizing those losses that we've experienced. Our second goal is to then recognize what is resilience and how do we identify our own personal strengths. And then we're actually going to have an opportunity for everyone to construct their own personal model of resilience, and hoping at that point that I have a courageous volunteer to kind of go through the steps with me. If not, I can kind of walk us through it together. So again, when we're thinking about the past 2 years, COVID has affected us greatly. It changed our lives, not only, in school, but all across the world. There was a loss of routine. We had a sense of, loss of physical gatherings of what we could do together. And then even in that experience, for some of our students, it was very abrupt, right? We had to leave and go back home. And for some of us, lost those in-person milestones, such as graduations and things like that. Some of us may have even lost work or have been affected by that in our families. Okay. And so some of these losses for some of us may have affected us more than others. And so I think it's recognizing what are some of those experiences that have kind of stayed with us, that we're still grieving, still mourning. And then also, what are ways in which we are stretched in new ways because of these losses that we had to adapt quickly to. So did we gain new skills? Did we reach out for help to do things in a new way? And when we're able to do that, we can look back and feel both our grief, but also see the resiliency that you all have demonstrated in this season. Okay. Our next slide, how do we adapt to the new normal? Well, ways in which we already did, right? We ended up having to turn inward, right? Being more reflective about our individual needs and abilities. We had to become flexible in this ever-changing environment. We had to recognize what individual supports we needed and reach out for support in those specific areas. And if we practice acceptance of the things we couldn't control, hopefully that reduced some anxiety. And then we focused our attention on the things that we could control. Like what were the areas of our life that we could create structure and routine because it was something that was in our control to do. When you think about resilience, this is our definition. Did it come up? Okay. There it is. According to the Oxford Dictionary, resilience is a capacity to recover quickly from difficulties and having toughness. So we've had to use our mental energy to monitor, our physical health during this time, our emotional health, our family's well-being, while also maintaining our focus in college and sustaining motivation during times of great uncertainty. This has allowed us to grow new muscles emotionally, and now is the time to hone in on those strengths and harness your sense of resilience. So you want to assess what has impacted you the most during this time. So kind of opening it up in the chat for those who are comfortable to even just kind of share what's been the biggest loss for you in these last 2 years, or what is something that you still feel that you're grieving in this time. For some of us, we've experienced grief, right? So for the first time in our life, around the world, we're all experiencing communal grief. So it's necessary to understand what's lost and to name it. Grief gives us a job. It is a command to slow down, to turn inward, and to recalibrate, living in a world without. So for some of us, it might be without a loved one, without a friend, without the plans that we made. Whatever it is, it's recognizing that some of these things we have lost. For some of us as students, we may have learning needs. So this may have something that was exacerbated in regards to our stress during this time. So you may have struggled with the transition to online learning and experiencing increased frustration and stress. So now it's recognizing, okay, what are the resources you use to be successful during this time, and what do you want to make sure you continue to use during this time moving forward? For some of us, in that sense of the job loss and the financial instability, it's recognizing for some of us, did we reach out for support? I've worked with many students that had to reach out to food banks during this time and see if they were able to get onto CalFresh. And that can be hard to reach for help, but for those who have already accessed that resource, they're going into this new season of maybe already having that set up support of having food stamps or being able to know quickly where to go to get food when they need it. One competence of individuals research shows who are resilient are ones that reach out for help when needed. Now that we have taken an inventory on what we lost during COVID, we want to also let that be our guide on what we need to cultivate now. So do we need to cultivate our support system? Do we need to have that increased academic support? Do we need to benefit from our spiritual mentoring at EPU, engage in a financial literacy workshop? Do we need academic coaching, or even engaging in ongoing mental health counseling, or even having some personal accountability? So when we think about psychological resilience, psychologists have identified some of the factors that make someone resilient. First is an individual's tendency to cope with stress and adversity. How they do that is if they have a positive attitude, they tend to cope well. Someone who's more optimistic, the ability to regulate their emotions, so how they manage and process when they're angry or when they're frustrated or when they're feeling overwhelmed, the ability to see failure as a helpful feedback. So in addition to that, there's some primary factors that we have noticed that people who are resilient have, and some of these are out of our control. It would have been based on how we were born. So some of us are born, already with maybe good health and having an easy temperament, having a secure attachment and basic trust in other people. We have interpersonal competence, including the ability to recruit help, meaning you can establish and foster good relationships. We have cognitive competence that encompasses the ability to read, capacity to plan, self-efficacy, and intelligence. And then we have emotional competence, including diverse emotional skills, such as ability to regulate one's emotions, delay gratification, maintain realistically high self-esteem, and employ creativity and humor to one's benefit. Also, if we have the ability and opportunity to contribute to others. So sometimes we can become overwhelmed with what's happening in our life, but when we have the capacity of whether it's serving, in our local community, in our church, that can help us foster resiliency as we're engaged in the process of helping others. Also, the people who are able to hold faith that your life matters and life has meaning. So having that moral sense of connection to others contributes to a sense of resiliency. So as you hear these competencies, kind of reflecting on who you are, maybe some of us can already say, like, I've had these capacities and that's what's helped me get to where I'm at today. As a college student, as a graduate student, I've had to have the ability, to process information, to get help when I needed it, to navigate college in of itself has been a process. So that's builds up your expertise in that area. So you already might have self-efficacy and intelligence. So these are traits that maybe you all possess. And so now our goal is how to help you continue to grow in them, even during times of adversity, knowing how do you lean into the traits that you already have. So an example I'll kind of share, like for a student, if you receive, this year a financial award letter from APU, and it's significantly less than the past year, if we're kind of having that all or nothing thinking, our first thought might be, there's no way I can pay this. I'm going to have to drop out of APU and I'm going to drop out of college. But then if you start to engage, right, in your traits of self-efficacy and intelligence, you might be able to say, like, okay, how can I ask for clarification? Can I set up a meeting with a financial aid counselor at APU and understand what happened? What's the difference? And then be able to explore, right? Am I using my maximum federal aid? Are there other avenues of support that I could reach out to, whether it's a personal loan or school loans? And then work study. Are you using the maximum hours per week? Could you talk to a supervisor and be able to say, like, I would really like to increase my hours, and be able to kind of plan that out if that would give you enough to pay down some of the balance. And then are there expenses at APU that you could decrease? Health insurance cost, housing, your meal plan, and kind of being creative with your options. And we want all students to be here, but sometimes the question might be, like, is private university affordable? And is it somewhere where you need to be? Or could you take a year off to do some community college classes and then come back? So the idea being that we don't want to get stuck in that catastrophizing of, like, oh great, I'm going to have to just drop out, but being able to use your skills to kind of think through a solution and hopefully create a plan of what else you can do. So I'm going to have us kind of think, how can we explore our own strengths? So if you do have like a notebook or paper, if you have your laptop on, and if you can just open up a Word doc, kind of just starting to think about writing these out as we kind of go through this exercise together. So as we're doing this individually, would love to see if anyone wanted to unmute and be my volunteer to kind of let me ask them some questions. Would someone be open to doing that? Let's see if I can open this bigger. Do I have any takers?
I can play the game with you, Patricia.
Okay,
If you don't
thank
have
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so Nathaniel, what is one thing you do every day because you really want to do it?
Um, um, I haven't thought about the questions ahead of time. I think one thing that I do, I get up, my wife and daughter leave for work at 5 in the morning, and I don't leave until 6. But I always make sure to get up early to see them off in the morning, and kiss my daughter goodbye and stuff like that. She's about 18 months, so she's still a little one, and that's like really important to me. Even though I'm extremely sleepy and I usually go back to bed for another 30 minutes after I'm done.
Yeah, so it sounds like having that ritual of being present and giving the goodbye hug and kiss is meaningful to you, that it pushes you to kind of wake up earlier than you need to.
Yeah.
Are there times in which you persisted and still did that, even like say when you were sick or really felt like you couldn't get up? Was there something that helped you persist and do it anyways?
I mean, yeah, this morning. Leo didn't go to bed until like 10:30, and so the sleep was rather poor quality, but still decided to do it. Yeah.
If you could think of like a visual, what's like a visual that you can kind of think of in your head that helps promote that connection? Like when you think of saying goodbye to Leo, what's like the visual that comes up for you?
I
If you
don't
could
know.
use like imagery to it.
I guess I just picture her, maybe
Hmm.
probably my daughter and her little smiling face.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, like just picturing her smile, right? That like even when you're tired, being able to visualize that in your mind, like, okay, if I push myself and get up, I'm going to still be able to engage and see that smile in her.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
good. Um, and so he, Nathaniel kind of gave an example of today, like having the poor sleep, but the challenge of how does he still do it and persevere, and wake up knowing that that's going to be that connection is going to fill him, right? So the ways in which we can get our needs met emotionally, sometimes we have to persist in times of difficulty to negotiate that action. So thank you, Nathaniel, for sharing that. I'm going to share in the chat. So here's the chat, our own personal model of resilience for us all to kind of work through. And if you can just message in the chat, did it go to everybody? Yeah. And if you didn't get it, as Nathaniel can also resend it.
Yeah, if you're having trouble with the file transfer on Zoom, which I know sometimes people do, just shoot me a message. I could even email it to you as we're going along here. But hopefully the file transfer on Zoom works for everybody.
Thank you. So our first step, as we kind of go through the worksheet together, is like, what are your strengths? So if you want to search for your strengths, it's like, what are things that naturally come easy for you? So I think like if I were to kind of, self-share, like, one of my strengths is I have like a really good work ethic. Like I, always want to do my best at work and, work really hard. So like today I served at my church for VBS and I was having to do a different activity. I was in charge of serving food. And I'm like, okay, how can I do this really well? Like, how can I apply my good work ethic to do really well? So it's like kind of noticing what are your strengths and how can you use them in other areas that maybe naturally you wouldn't know you could use them in. And then step two is identify an obstacle that you face, right? So um, in one of our articles that I will share as well afterwards if you're more interested in learning further about how to engage in resiliency building. There's a therapist who's interviewing someone and he struggles at his work that he'll do well for a couple of days, but the moment he makes a mistake, he kind of is really hard on himself and then it's hard to keep going. So the therapist in this article is engaging him in this task that I'm doing with you all. And one of the things he loves to do is he posts on his video blog. And she's like, oh, what do you like about your video blog? And he says, like, I like, posting content and getting people's reactions and seeing what people think. And then he does, this every day. And so she kind of asks him these questions and recognizes he has this strength, right, of being able to want to please others, being creative. And so that helps highlight strengths that maybe he didn't have. And so then she's able to use those strengths in identifying like how do you use these strengths when there is an obstacle at work, like you have a project and it doesn't go well. How can you use your creativity to still persevere and not give up? So step three would be to ask yourself, how can I use my character strength to navigate that obstacle? So in this example, like if the young gentleman again, did poorly on a project, his strength would be, okay, I'm creative. Can I problem solve with a team worker? Can I try to do this project in a different way where I could use, my if he's really good, like with creating videos that he could do as a way of showing his supervisor that he is trying to kind of make sense of this or follow through on the project still. And then it's put your strength to work. So it's identifying, okay, what is the strength? How can I use it to navigate this obstacle? And then creating a plan for how you're going to use it moving forward. And then step five would be to review what worked and then see what you may need to change. And so in this theory, the idea is how can you use imagery as a way of reminding yourself of the steps. So like in our first step, we're using our magnifying glass. And that second step, it's like that hurdle. And the third step, it's our compass. Like what can we do to kind of navigate us in life? And then four is just like, what are those steps that we can take? Like how can we make this real concrete to move forward? So one thing that we know that's constant in life is change. Nothing gives us immunity from it. So resilience is the capacity to adapt to negative change and recover from it as quickly as possible. We often don't need to recover from positive change, right? So for some of us, if we've just got hired at a job that you applied for, that's a good thing, right? If you were selected as a scholarship recipient, you were approved for that private loan to pay college expenses, that's not hard to adapt to, right? It's a good, good change. but it's the hard things in life that resiliency can help us process, respond, and act. And that is huge in regards to the implication of where our story will go. So either we will succumb to it or will we surmount it. This is where our belief system kicks in, and this is where using tools of overcoming negative thoughts can help us get unstuck during challenging times. So again, let's reviewing those steps in your own worksheet, I think can be helpful, and even thinking about this particular semester as to what are the strengths that you need to lean into and what might be some obstacles that you might face, and then how are you going to work to address that together. And so here's kind of like a piece of it of what I wanted to highlight. And just noticing like how can you start to focus on this now, but then also go back to this, right? So say for instance, you have a strength that you're very, social, and maybe you join a leadership position. And so that's a strategy that you're going to use your ability to be social to gain, experience that you can then put onto your resume. And so maybe your image and metaphor is, you speaking to others, or seeing kind of you go up this mountain of, achieving some career skills. So it's being able to recognize like how can you start with your strength, and then what are strategies that you can use, and then what are ways in which you can have that image or metaphor to remind you of that during times that may be difficult. And so now we're going to kind of review some of the thinking errors that can undermine resiliency that we all struggle with at times. So we often have automatic thoughts that, if left unchallenged, can leave us feeling overwhelmed, not good enough, or even feeling that if one thing goes wrong, everything is going to go wrong. So thinking errors are what we call cognitive distortions, and they are unhelpful thinking patterns we have learned over time. So what do we mean by irrational thinking? It could be an irrational idea or belief. So anything that distorts reality, is illogical, prevents you from reaching your goals, leads to unhealthy emotions, or leads to self-defeating behavior. So sometimes the demands that we put on ourselves can be an error that we struggle with. Did the next one come up? Oops, there it is. How we compare ourselves to others, how we can say like, I'm not good enough, or, rating yourself compared to someone else. Frustration intolerance. So when we notice that we can easily get knocked off, kind of like our scale, that's a sign that we need to develop skills to cope so that we don't easily get flustered. And if we notice that we're catastrophizing. And so what that looks like, again, like the example of the financial aid award, is that you get one news and it goes all the way to like, okay, now I can't go to school ever. So it's kind of thinking the worst possible situation with the first bit of difficult news. So again, how we start to challenge this is that we can understand that we're going to have obstacles in our life, but how our brain may automatically judge something to be too difficult, your behavioral response might be to avoid it. So instead, we want to train our brains to slow down, evaluate the situation, both with what may seem difficult and our capacity to address a challenge one step at a time. With others, we want to kind of recognize that often we're comparing ourselves to someone's best, sense of self, right? What they post on Instagram. That might not be their reality. So often when we can refocus on ourselves and say like, okay, what can I do better this year than what I did last year? Not so much comparing ourselves, but being able to say, how can I set a goal that's obtainable for me compared to what I did last year? So that you can do something that is going to help you move forward without making you feel like you're stuck because you're trying to compare yourself to someone else, not knowing what their reality really is. So frustration tolerance, I think one goal is to recognize how can you grow your window of tolerance. So how can you notice what makes you feel out of whack and intentionally start practicing grounding skills in the moment to allow your prefrontal cortex in your brain to get back online, right? So often when we're stressed, we don't give our brain time to kind of evaluate how to self-regulate. So sometimes that can look as, taking a deep breath. It can be noticing the words that we're using and being intentional to overcoming some of those negative statements we might be making. And then again, with the catastrophizing, I think it's recognizing, okay, instead of thinking of the worst thing right now, what can I think about that's logical of what I could do even in the face of bad news. Click them all again. Okay, there it goes. So then the next slide shows us the 4 thinking habits that foster resilience. So it's kind of like the opposite of the one we went through. So it's noticing what are our preferences. Instead of feeling like the demands that we have on ourselves, what could we prefer to do? What can we notice that we choose to do? So we can develop healthy attitudes and expectations by seeing what our values are and how we move forward through adversity, honoring what we value and disputing unhealthy beliefs. We can practice self-acceptance and lean into our emotion and practice coping skills, the deep breathing, journaling, engaging in an activity that creates an opposite emotion of what we are feeling. So say for instance, we're struggling with procrastination and doing a class assignment. Can we engage in an activity in that moment that we can follow the steps and do easily? Like, can you make yourself a cup of coffee? Can you put your favorite playlist on and put a load to wash? Like, is there something that you can do that will move you forward as opposed to getting to the place where you just shut down? And if you're prone to thinking the worst in every situation, practicing interrupting that all or nothing thinking and ask, right? How many times have I thought I would fail a course? And then how many times did I actually fail a course? Sometimes quantifying our experiences and providing evidence to debunk our stinking thinking can help us recognize that, okay, this is just my all or nothing thinking, and this is how I can practice interrupting that. And then we can also look at how our worldview impacts our thinking and coping. So according to Dr. Albert Ellis, so someone, if you want to learn more again about how to build resiliency, you can look him up. He's a psychologist that has done a lot of research in this area. He shares that there's 3 musts that hold us back. Anytime we say, I must do well, you must treat me well, and the world must be easy, we'll get us stuck anytime things don't go our way. So we need to recognize, are we stuck in any of these thinking patterns, and can we shift our thinking and thus, shift our behavior? So again, when you're recognizing if you must do something, it leaves you feeling like I'm not good enough, feeling frustrated really easily, and then feeling again like everything is awful. In the same way, if we have really high unrealistic expectations of others, it leaves us feeling like, oh, this person just doesn't like me. They're just not a good friend. I don't have a good support system, because you're holding them to these expectations of what they must do. And if we're having a belief system that the world must be this way, it can leave us feeling frustrated, with our world and feeling like we have no ability to create change. Okay, so before I go to my next slide, there it is. So in the previous slide, when we do that thinking, our outcome is that we have unhealthy negative emotions. So now when we turn our demands into preferences, it's being able to say, what do I prefer, right? And even if I don't, right, can I still practice self-acceptance? So can I still practice recognizing, okay, I'm in a financial situation that's hard. It's not what I want, but if I practice self-acceptance, it gives you that space in your mind to be able to then problem solve. The moment you get stuck in that tension of like, this is not what I expected, this is not what I wanted, then you're so fixated that you're not able to process, and your brain's not able to really help you think through it. So again, we want to realize, we want to release the pressure to do things a certain way and recognize that we can choose to accept a challenge and not fight it. So again, we can also practice this with others when we accept our family for who they are and not get stuck in wishing they were different. We can release unhealthy expectations and use our energy to find collateral support. So often we're very upset when someone doesn't meet our emotional needs, but if we recognize that's who they are and they cannot be that for us, it helps us shift our attention to, okay, how can I reach out, at APU and ask for a mentor, ask for a spiritual advisor, or meet with a therapist, or even develop a good relationship with your supervisor, or letting a friend know, that this is an area where you're struggling. And I think when it comes to our worldview during COVID, we were challenged by all the things that were out of our control. And again, if we got fixated on all of that, on vaccinations, on the political system, it could leave us feeling stuck. And so it's recognizing, okay, there's certain things I cannot change, but what can I do for myself for self-preservation or for ways in which I do want to create advocacy or awareness of areas that are important to you. But what can you do in your own path of life that leads you to getting your needs met, even when things feel uncertain and out of control? And then one of the other themes that comes up with resilience a lot is grit. And so there is another psychologist, Dr. Angela Duckworth, who's done a lot of research on this as well. And so this is a book, if someone wants to kind of read more on this topic, that you can get, through Amazon. And so again, I know everyone's kind of listening, hopefully, but if anyone's open to sharing and have some reflective questions to kind of think or even just share through the chat, or you can unmute yourself. But if you could think back to a time recently where you were working toward a goal that was important to you, as you worked toward this goal, did you face a challenge or setback along the way? And then what made you keep striving for this goal, even though it was hard? So I kind of just want to give a minute or so to see if anybody wants to share about that, if they have an experience that they want to share about. And if not, can I pick on you, Rhonda, like to share kind of without obviously saying a name, but can you share maybe an experience, are you there, Rhonda, of a first gen student at APU and maybe something that got an obstacle in their way and how they were able to overcome it?
Oh, certainly. Forgive me for not being on camera. I wouldn't want to frighten you. Um, um, maybe I think the biggest thing, that I've seen with a student is believing that they cannot succeed in a class. They may have gotten a poor grade at the beginning, or maybe a paper that didn't, sort of jive with who they believed they were in terms of just coming right into college and feeling like they were very confident in a particular class. And we're really devastated, to get a poor grade on that first exam, that first paper. I think it was both of those things the student didn't do well in. And so student was ready to drop the class without even having any conversation with the instructor, without coming to talk to our office or our counseling team, I should say advising team, trio advisors or anything. And once we were able, I just happened to talk to the student. And once I was able to talk to the student, he really was able to see that, well, he had already built up his rejection and failure before ever saying a word to anybody about anything. He was convinced that was it. And so I was able to really sort of talk about the ledge in the sense of, hey, why don't you at least talk to the instructor? You're going to drop the class anyway. Have a conversation, see what he says. And what we found is that, that instructor kind of, is known for being a little difficult with first year students. And he actually thought that the student was doing better than maybe the student thought that they were doing. So that positive feedback seemed to be very surprising to the student. And because he asked a question of, that instructor, and then he came back to our office and he talked to us some more, and he heard our stories, he saw that he wasn't so different than many of us.
Yeah. So that sense of that he's not alone.
Exactly.
That we've all struggled in that way.
Exactly. And I think that helped him to continue. He ended up getting to be in the class, he stayed in the class, got to be in the class. And he always talks about, like, I was ready to drop that class and I'd have been taking that class all over again, right? But it was just a question of you had already decided without speaking with anyone. And I think we all do that. I mean, I'm in a doctoral program and I can assure you I do that quite often. So I think this is as good for me as it is for any of the other students here, because I'm sure my chair hates me.
That's your negative belief. But yeah, we all struggle in that. Thank you, Rhonda, for sharing. But I think that happens often with students, is that the one poor grade, then it becomes like that's all of who they are. Exactly. And it's hard for them to see them, that it's just one part, right? And sometimes, once we get to college, we do get a poor grade, but it's being able to talk about it and reach out for support. Yeah.
Yes.
So
And
great. That's a
so
great example.
this is good. So it's good for when you're just starting out, and it's good for when you've been in a while. So this is fantastic stuff.
Thank you, Renda. And so one of the examples that Dr. Angela Duckworth in her book Grit talks about is she conducted a study with 1,200 West Point cadets who were subjected to an intensive 7-week training program called BEAST. What she found is that the greatest predictor of success in the summer training program was not the SAT score, not your high school rank, not your leadership experience or your athletic ability, but rather grit. Um, so that way we can conclude that grit and resilience are important drivers of success. And also noting that grit is not luck and it's not based on talent, but one's courage and passion to persevere even when things are difficult. And I think college is that stage where we'll see that come out, right? Where we'll see, okay, this is where I might struggle. How can I use some of these skills to push myself forward? Because this is how you will overcome these challenges more easily. And so we're going to go into this slide kind of just breaking down the word grit. And when I share the slides afterwards, you can do this self-assessment through the website at angeladuckworth.com/grit scale, where you can actually see how gritty are you. And so it kind of asks you some questions that gets you thinking like, okay, if I'm not gritty, what can I do to be more gritty? But when we look at this slide, just kind of working through it, G, it's the growth, right? How likely are we to seek fresh ideas, perspectives, inputs to help you succeed? So noticing that sometimes if we get stuck internalizing, so thinking a lot throughout the day, we might be believing things that are not true. So how can we just talk that out, right? With a friend, with, if you're a part of our TRIO program, or any of your professors, being able to just talk about what you're experiencing so that you don't just believe it. R is the resilience. Again, noticing how do we bounce back from adversity and being able to use adversity to make us better, right? When you recognize the times in your life when things have been difficult and you didn't give up, remember those experiences and say, okay, what did I do then that I can do now if I'm having a hard time again? And then the I is instinct. It's about how can you continue to go after your goals the best way, right? Even if you have to do it differently, right? Not the hardest way, but what's the best way you can get through it. And then the T is tenacity. So again, it's that perseverance, persistence, never say die, never say quit dimension of grit. So it's doing whatever you can to persevere. And so I know somebody had direct messaged me and kind of said, like, sometimes deadlines help push us, right? If we know we have to do this paper to graduate, it pushes us to do it. And so then we can want to learn the skill. How do we start developing this so that we don't have to procrastinate, don't have to wait to that last minute, but can start kind of overcoming these challenges before they get bigger. And then when we think about how to build resiliency, again, there is another acronym called using the 4 A's. So using the 4 A's to improve your ability to manage your emotions and become more resilient. You can practice this when you feel less emotional to learn to tap into the tools more quickly when your emotions are stronger. So the first one is awareness. So being aware of what is going on in your body and in your brain. Where do you feel tension? What are you feeling? Because your emotions contain data. So notice what they are telling you about the situation and yourself. What can you do to increase your awareness? Awareness is a critical first step toward mindful action. The second step is acceptance. So accept the way that you feel is the way you feel, and it's okay. So again, instead of fighting through that emotion. So emotions are part of our natural response to the experience. If you start judging yourself, right, I should be feeling X or I shouldn't be feeling Y, explore where these thoughts come from and then let them go, right? Accept the situation and what you can and can't control. And then the next A is adjustment. After acceptance comes choice. What adjustments can you make to improve the situation? How can you shift your body, energy, and thinking? What negative self-talk might have contributed to the situation, and what positive beliefs are more helpful and accurate now? And then the last A is action, right? So this is when we talk about that plan that if you're able to go through can really help you kind of outline some strategies to move forward. Take action and do something. Do it consciously and intelligently. Use your emotional awareness as a way to kind of guide what you'd want to do. And then consider the last time you were in a state of indecisiveness. How did you feel in that moment? You made a decision and took action. What positive changes happened as a result? And then our next piece is also in this is also learning how do we accept failure. When we recognize that failure is a normal part of life, it's not as scary, right? It's going to happen. And then when you practice accepting it, it helps you not, feel so overwhelmed when it does happen. So failure, we learn how to succeed. So we ask the greatest athletes, the most well-known inventors, the celebrities, and they've all risen to high acclaim. And they will tell you that the successes they have, it only came because they were willing to fail and they persisted through failure. So sharing failure is a way to create a culture of normalizing the experience. So even thinking, if someone, again, I know we're kind of quiet just listening, but thinking maybe sometimes in our own lives when we failed, but then how did it lead to success, right? So that's something you can kind of reflect on. And then recognizing, what are some of your favorite words of encouragement around failure? Some of us can kind of think of that, right? Something our parents told us, a coach told us, but this is a time before we start the next semester, maybe to create some mantras for ourselves of what we're going to say. I'm going to fall down and get back up. I'm going to persevere. I'm going to persist. So inspiring grit and resiliency. Again, so you want to focus on your language choices. So when you praise someone for a characteristic or strength, it teaches a fixed mindset. For example, you are really smart, or you are so flexible. But praising for effort or strategy fosters resiliency. So like, I love the way, you persisted. Maybe today people had things to do and you're like, no matter what, I'm going to get on this call. And you were able to do that. So praising someone for their effort and praising yourself for your efforts and reaching out for support is a great way to build your sense of resiliency. You want to surround yourself with positive people. Your thoughts become your reality, so you want to have the thoughts and actions of people that lift you up around you. You want to adopt flexible thinking patterns, so any way in which you can become less rigid, and your thoughts and actions allows resilience and grit to blossom. And then you also want to set goals that align with your purpose. So again, when you're thinking about the program you're studying at APU, I know some of us do get really fixed on, I have to have straight A's. And sometimes we have to think, when we go for that job interview, it's the degree that we're talking about, right? What did we learn? What are some of the things that stood out in our classes? They're not going to look at your transcript with you at your job interview or look to see if you had a 4.0 GPA. It's going to be about what are those relationships that you built? What are those lectures that really stood out to you and that you engaged in? So I think being able to create goals that align with who you want to be and not have them be so rigid, right? Not that it's just based on a grade value, but maybe it's based on, you want to learn how to take a work study job, or you want to be engaged in leadership on campus. So when you take time to reflect, you also bring awareness to the things you have accomplished and the path you want to take. So whether your reflection takes the form of a meditation, a journaling session, or a walk outside, when you give yourself time to assess your accomplishments in a non-judgmental way, it allows you to adjust your actions accordingly. And so we're moving towards the end. I know we have a couple minutes left, but just recognizing for some of you, if you notice, okay, I have had some difficult losses this season, I think I may need some extra support, you're welcome to give our office a call. And so this might be when you notice that your stress is interfering with your ability to, focus in class. When your ability to take care of yourself is being compromised. If you find yourself preoccupied with concerns, feeling overwhelmed, or anytime if you're ever at a danger to yourself or others, please call our office. We're open during the summer for solution sessions, and we will be starting ongoing services the first day the classes start. And so the way in which you can engage with us, we are located at Magnolia Court. This is on East Campus, next to the Student Health Center, right past the baseball field. We are doing in-person services and telehealth for those of you who might still benefit from that. And so recognizing our services, I do urgent care and we all kind of rotate on that as well. So we do provide same day appointments. So we were doing primarily telehealth, but again, this season we will be in person. So you can always call and schedule an appointment, or you can just walk in and schedule. If we are closed, we have 24-hour support through protocol. You still call our office number and press 2 to be connected to our after-hours support. We do offer different groups. So I know for some students who maybe want to go deeper in this topic, we do have a Thrive workshop where we learn a little bit further in a one-time workshop strategies on how to manage stress and trauma and how to get yourself back into your window of tolerance when you're out of it. We also offer a women's emotional support group, a boundaries group, and we do have a student of color group that we offer as well. Nathaniel is going to speak to us about outreach. Do you want to go ahead and plug here since I have it on the slide?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Patricia. You're learning a lot about resilience today. Hopefully you're taking some good away tips here. But if you want to learn more about anything, if you want to learn how to become a better listener, if you want to learn how to deal with anxiety, if you want to learn how to improve your relationships and manage your time better, we're going to be doing a whole series of lectures like this one that'll be both in person and virtual. We're going to be starting in October. So there'll be information emailed out to you with the materials from these slides. I'd love to see you all there. It's some of our favorite programming we do. That starts in the middle of October, and it's 6 weeks leading up to Thanksgiving. And you can come whichever ones you want.
Thank you, Nathaniel. We do offer couples therapy, including premarital, and then we have individual therapy. We do a brief treatment model, but you can always start with us, and we can always help you connect to a provider in the community if you need further support. So again, that first step of making an appointment is you can complete paperwork online through your My Cougar portal. You give us a call at our office. There's our number. And then we can do that telehealth treatment if needed. Otherwise, we're doing it in person. And then when you meet with your counselor to discuss your concerns, you can then discuss, what your treatment plan would be and how often you would meet and for how long. And then some campus resources that we want to highlight in addition to our office is we have the Office of Campus Ministry if you're wanting to have some spiritual support, our Office of Accessibility and Disability Resources if you need any accommodations. If you are a student of color and you want to be engaged in programming with other students, we have our Student Center for Reconciliation and Diversity. And then want to open it up for questions. I saw something come through the chat. Nathaniel, are you seeing that? Oh, it's my direct message maybe. Okay.
But thank you all. We're happy to take any questions.